plan and let the House know how many employees are being hired to do this?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, it is correct that the budget for the corporate HR plan is $1.2 million. Mr. Speaker, the cost of not doing this would be insurmountable.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it seems like a very high number considering that we already know what the problem is. Does the minister think it's reasonable to spend so much rather than putting the tender out for public tender?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, the corporate HR plan is something that this government has made a priority. It's something that, if we do not do, it will cost the government, again, millions of dollars. We're faced with countless employees that are eligible to retire in the next 5 to 10 years. If we do not have the means to address the situation immediately, we will face a crisis in the HR community.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again, we have another crisis on our hands here, obviously. They've finally woken up to that one. But could the minister table in the House... Yeah.
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park has the floor.
Table in this House any documents which indicate why the decision was made to implement a human resource strategy in-house instead of putting the contract out to public tender and getting the best possible price.
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for the question because it gives me the opportunity to stress how important and how good our staff and the Public Service Commission, the quality employees that we have to implement such a corporate HR report. And this is why we chose to do it in-house. We have the qualifications to do it here. Why go to an outside agency to do something we can do in-house?
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address my first question through you to the Minister of Transportation. My constituents for more than 130 years have been crossing the Northwest Arm to a public wharf at Oakland Road. They used ferries, rowboats, and other small craft as a cheap, simple, and quick way to get to town in a way that today we would call a healthy lifestyle. Now, however, without any permission, neighbours have begun dumping many tons of fill into the water to extend their property and are blocking the wharf. Yet the provincial government is taking no action. It's like standing by watching while someone builds their house in the middle of the Highway 101. My question to the Minister of Transportation is, will you take the necessary action to protect this important and irreplaceable transportation resource?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
I think it's a very sensible question, Mr. Speaker, but I don't think that falls under my jurisdiction. However, I'll be pleased to look into it and see if it does fall under my mandate, and if so, I'll be very, very pleased to progress it. Oh, I can swim.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic on your first supplementary.
Actually, I'm not at all surprised that you don't know whether it falls under your jurisdiction because there are so many jurisdictions involved at this point. This is the problem. It's why my next question is in fact addressed to the Premier. There are other parts of the Nova Scotia coast which are also lined with the so-called pre-Confederation water lots. There are advertisements showing some of them for sale, and one actually describes a part of that subdividable property as being simply land currently underwater. Today, when I opened the paper, I found news of a development plan for the Dartmouth shipyards with 8 hectares of pre-Confederation water lots to be filled in to create more land. It's also happening at Ketch Harbour, Herring Cove, Sambro, and all down the South Shore. There are at least 6 federal and provincial departments, not including the Minister of Transportation's department, but at least 6, which have responsibilities here. But infilling off the Nova Scotia coast is continuing. No one is taking responsibility. Premier, will you take responsibility for coordinating protection of the Nova Scotia coastline?
The Premier.
Thank you very much. It is a great question, and there are some jurisdictional issues. Perhaps since there is a large legal component, I would refer the question to the Minister of Justice.
No, Mr. Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very familiar with pre-Confederation water grants. In fact, indeed, there's sometimes an issue with respect to post-Confederation ones that were granted, depending on whether it was a federal harbor or a provincial harbor. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of permits required. The primary permit, of course, is if it affects navigation, the Navigable Waters Protection Act. And the Navigable Waters Protection Act is a requirement of the Government of Canada. They have responsibility for shipping, and they are required to approve any infilling that's done. These are private property. These are private property interests covered by water, Mr. Speaker, and while we have to respect the private property rights of individuals, I can assure the honourable member that there are government agencies who monitor this activity very closely.
Honourable member for Halifax Atlantic on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is that I've been trying to get a meeting with Navigable Waters Protection for some time now, and eventually a meeting that I scheduled was cancelled because they couldn't figure out who was responsible, even in that department. However, this question is a more simple one, I think. My question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. Charlie Dara's wharf was destroyed by the storm surge at Herring Cove, and he and his sons have rebuilt it by hand, but without permission from the Department of Natural Resources, and therefore he must remove it. My question to the Minister of Natural Resources is, is it possible that you will ensure all the other unauthorized infills along the coast are removed, as you have jurisdiction to do?
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite raised this in estimates with me and my department, and I answered the member there, and I'll answer again, that we take the jurisdiction that's under my mandate very seriously. We had an incident in my neighboring riding in Argyll that they illegally filled in a piece of property in the harborway, and we asked them to remove it. No, and then we forced them to remove it. And Mr. Speaker, if this person did not do this by the law, we will enforce the law. But if the individual wants to bring the file over to me, I told her that I would definitely look into 3 files that she brought to my attention in estimates. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now a member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, in the budget just passed, it was stated that 100 nursing home beds would be established in Cape Breton and 150 for the Halifax region. The minister also stated that Berwick and the Annapolis Valley would receive an additional 30 beds. While these regions need beds, Western Nova Scotia needs more than 30. My question is, why is there more beds being established in other parts of the province than there is in the Annapolis Valley West?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'll resist the temptation to talk about what the honourable member did with respect to the budget, and answer the question. Mr. Speaker, we are involved, as I have indicated in the House on many occasions, on a comprehensive review of the whole issue of continuing care within this province. The beds that were identified in the budget were beds that we say need to begin proceeding now. That is not to say that there aren't needs for beds in other parts of the province, and the exercise that is currently underway will clearly assist us in determining where those beds are best located and the number that should be had. It will also assist us in determining what our potential is to assist people remaining in their homes longer, so that we will require fewer beds, or at least keep the number of beds to a minimum. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on the opposite member's business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you call resolution number 4077?
Resolution number 4077, the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It certainly gives me great pleasure to rise in my place today and talk about Resolution 4077. Mr. Speaker, this deals with fair pricing of gasoline products and home heating fuels, Mr. Speaker. And the reason we thought it so important to bring this forward today is very simple. It is now a year since the government brought in an ill-fated bill that went nowhere. Now you know the bill that was here. What was interesting, Bill 79 that was here, Mr. Speaker. What was interesting about that the Premier said in his place today that it was stood basically on the 18th. Now, what was interesting though, on the 13th of May, the minister responsible for Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations brought in a resolution empowering and enacting the Select Committee on Pricing. So one would assume the reason he wanted to bring that forward, he realized that bill was useless. And he wanted to get the input of Nova Scotians from one end of this province to the other to find out what we can do to bring pricing controls into place. And so, with that in mind, the House accepted it, and we enacted a select committee, and we toured the province, Mr. Speaker. And we toured the province and put forward a select committee on petroleum product pricing. And in that, we put forward some bold steps. Very bold steps, and I'm going to tell you, Mr. Speaker, and as you know, you were one of the hardworking members of that committee, Mr. Speaker, and we heard from many, many people from across this province. And to a person, what did they tell us? They wanted regulation. They wanted regulation that they'll know where the price is going to be in the morning and the stability of the market for them to buy in. That was the consumer side. And I'll get back to that in a moment, Mr. Speaker. On the retail side, what we heard from retailers was simple, that if we don't get some sort of protection from the big guys, we're out of business. And we're going to tell you the ones that are going to go like dominoes are ones in rural, and in somewhat I'll refer to not so much as rural, but kind of remote areas. And remote areas being areas like Canso Town and areas like that, where there's a fair amount of open land between or distance between one service station to another or one set of pumps to another. Now, what they have said is becoming absolutely true from the retailers. We're seeing almost weekly closures of these service stations. Now, at some point, I wouldn't doubt today that the minister will stand up and tell us that Bill 79 does this. Well, Bill 79 doesn't, Mr. Speaker, and, you know, I will say this, I am not going to debate on the floor here today Bill 79 because the minister won't bring it forward. If they want to bring it forward, they keep forgetting the one piece in this whole puzzle is that they're the government. And if the government, if it is bringing things forward and allowing people to debate it in certain areas, then that's what they should do. And it's not uncommon, especially in the minority house, to bring certain changes to the bill. That's all. But I'm not, as I said, I'm not going to literally waste my time today on Bill 79. We've put it on the record, and we want it there, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, we talk about the dangers of what's going on in an unregulated market. And I'll tell you, it's whether it's the McRae's in Bedeck or the Pettigrews in Amherst or the Crookshanks in Canning. You know, these are not bustling cities like HRM here. And what's particularly galling when you look at HRM, which for the major oil companies is a real lucrative share of the pie, that almost 90% of those stations are operated by the big companies. That's why one of the bold steps we had agreed to and was the only thing that this minister's department reacted to was divorcement. We realized, I believe, every member on that committee realized the bold step in which we were taking. But yet, it was the only reaction. That was the only thing. No. And from then on, The silence has been deafening coming out of that minister's office regarding this report, Mr. Speaker. This is a report that consumers said, yes, this is what we want. This is a report that retailers said, yes, this is what we want. So then one has to wonder, and we've seen the government have the compassion and the understanding of Nova Scotians not to get mired down in a philosophical position of we don't believe in regulation. And so that's why we're really perplexed on this side of the floor. We're saying this is what everybody wants. We want pricing regulations. And we can work on a model, and we can sit down and debate these things, but we have to do it sooner, Mr. Speaker, than later. You know, I look in our report from last year, and we were talking about pricing. And I don't believe, if you wish, I'll table this, but it's from the Select Committee, which is already tabled, but it's obviously your prerogative, Speaker, if you wish. But on page 17 of the report, on May 16th, which is, we'll call it a year ago for the sake of a couple of days, and gasoline was selling at retail locations at 96.9 cents a liter. 33.6 cents was the price of crude. 18.6 cents was the refiner's operating margin. 10 cents was federal excise. 15.5 was provincial excise tax. And 2.6 cents was HST. The retailer's operating margin, 3.9 cents. 3.9 cents. These retailers, Mr. Speaker, are not rich women and men. It's a back-breaking job. It's a job that to keep those pumps going, you know you have to operate them, you know, at least 12 hours a day. Most of them, because of the automotive industry, most of them now have lost their bays. They're convenience stores, and that's a whole other pressure being brought onto them by the large multinational oil companies of what they're expected to do. So at some point, you know, we have to come in, and when they talk to us, we have to listen to them. We have to listen to them, if for no other reason. When you hear the retailer in Shettycamp telling you, you know, that I'm the only one on that side of Smoky that sells gasoline. So what does that do? Besides having the pressure, that there's 2 service stations in Shettycamp. There's a burden here that no one realizes. A few years ago, when the only service station in Pleasant Bay closed, which is up over North Mountain. What was that? That their fire department have to send people down into Shettycamp to get fuel for that emergency vehicle. These are not only ones, but we're not even talking about keeping rural Nova Scotian businesses viable. We're talking about protecting people that live in rural Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. What we're asking the Premier and all of his cabinet and all the backbenchers, because, you know, I realize, I'm not going down the road of pointing over there, Mr. Premier, talk to some that were for it, talk to some against. I'm talking through you, through the Speaker to you, Mr. Premier, as these are things that have to be done. These are, we're seeing, not only, you know, one could say it's a way of life being lost. Well, you know, that's experienced in many, many businesses in this province, and someone could say, well, you know, that's just progress. But, you know, when you do not have the ability to have gas if you live in the town of Canso, that's a problem. And when the margin's not there, you're just not going to be able to sell it. Especially now when you see people coming in off the highway in Antigonish, you know, and you see now that superstores on the highway there selling it, and so you wonder about what's going to happen about them selling it kind of as a lost leader, if you will, Mr. Speaker. So that's a real concern. The idea around protection of consumers when we look at regulated pricing, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, we have you know, we studied and we put forward the Quebec model, the PEI model, and the Newfoundland model. And these are all very good workable systems. And we weren't even as bold. We didn't think we would be in the minister's face and say, choose this one or none. What we did, in my thought, was a very reasonable position. Here is three options, A, B, and C, if you will. Pick one that will best suit the consumers of Nova Scotia. But instead of hearing that, all we've heard from this minister is no. I have a bill. Before Nova Scotia had this information, I put a bill together. This is my bill. Either pass it or be quiet. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not what the Retail Gas Association are telling us. That's not what consumers are telling us. Consumers are asking us to get involved. We want regulation. Retailers need pricing, some sort of regulation of pricing when it comes to pricing guarantee, because they're being socked. They're being socked by predatory pricing in some ways by the big guys. It's hard to do, Mr. Speaker. We're not asking to save one badly run business. We're not saying protect some person because they can't run their business. What we're saying is allow these businesses to operate, to serve the community. And whether it's in parts of Pictou County or Cape Breton County, Mr. Speaker, in less than a year, 3 long-serving garages in the town of Waterford closed their pumps. In effect, in the town of Waterford, there is one full-service service station with pumps, and the next one is about 3 kilometers down the road. The town of Lewisburg had 3, have none now. The town of Dominion had a set of pubs, none now. Who's next, Mr. Speaker? That's what we have to ask. And this is one of the strange things when the good of the seller and the retailer, or the retailer and the consumer are one in the same. That it comes in and allows them to provide a service. And the people that receive that service are happy for it. I told you last week about Mr. Cruikshank's situation in Canning, where in effect, the people will now have to travel some distance in a round trip to get to a service station about 60 kilometers. That's not right, Mr. Speaker. What the right thing to do is, if this minister is serious about that bill, it needs modification. We are willing to sit down with him and look at Bill 79 using the All Parties Committee report on Select Committee as a template. That's what we're saying. But if the minister's going to get up in his place today and tell everybody here that it's my way or the highway, well, we'll be running on empty, Mr. Speaker. There'll be no service stations left in rural Nova Scotia in a very short time. If it's left up to this government to do orders and councils, that ain't the way to go. It has to be open, Mr. Speaker. It has to be transparent. These folks in your gallery today need to know that when they're purchasing oil and getting oil or gas put in the grounds at their station, they're not going to be whacked in 48 hours. The 48 hours, all that's going to do is cause panic buying. We need regulations that work. We think it was provided for in the Select Committee, and we urge the minister to work with the other parties and some of his backbench to get it done, and get it done right away. Thank you.
Thank you. Order. 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 Sit down. Order. I'll have to ask the members in the gallery to please not signify pleasure or displeasure with anything said in this hall. Thank you. I'll recognize the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to take 15 minutes of the time of the House to speak about this resolution, because it gives me an opportunity to take some time to talk about some myths and some facts as it relates to the proposal that we as government have put before this House over a year ago. But before I do that, I want to talk about history, Mr. Speaker. A year ago, on May 19th, 2004, in a chamber just down the hall, the Law Amendments Committee, which consisted of members from Chester St. Margaret's, members from Sheet Harbour Guysborough, Halifax Clayton Park, Cape Breton Centre, Richmond County, Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, Halifax Atlantic, and Halifax Chebucto, on a motion moved by the member for Cape Breton Centre, decided to shelf Bill number 79 that would provide for protection for the interests of Nova Scotians. It would provide for protection for service to rural Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, and it would provide for protection to small businesses.
Point of order. I'll recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you. I don't know if it was inadvertent or not, but he said moved by the member from Cape Breton Centre, and I did not move that.
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, you have the floor.
Yeah, the member opposite is correct. It was actually the member for Cape Breton South, and I apologize for inadvertently referring to that member. I will say, though, Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Law Amendments consisted of 6 members of the opposition and 3 members of the government. It was the opposition members that voted to shelf Bill 79. Bill 79, Mr. Speaker, is a bill that will provide protection for small business people in the province of Nova Scotia.
Hear, hear.
It's a
Hear,
bill
hear.
that will provide protection for the interests of Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, and it's a bill that will provide protection for rural Nova Scotia business, and that's what the bill is all about, Mr. Speaker. I want to point to a couple of elements in the bill that have been somewhat maligned. Mr. Speaker, this bill provides for an opportunity to fix wholesale prices or a minimum and maximum of wholesale prices. It provides for an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to set a maximum retail price. It provides for an opportunity to set a minimum and maximum retail markups, Mr. Speaker. That's what Bill 79 does, Mr. Speaker. And it's a bill that would see the folks in the gallery and Nova Scotians protected by their government. And that's what this is all about. When I became Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations in August of 2003, immediately I began getting concerns from independent retailers and from Nova Scotians about the high price of gas and about the fact that they were being squeezed in their margins by big oil. Immediately, I began the process of instructing my staff and developing a process that we as a legislature could look at, a piece of legislation that would protect their interests, Mr. Speaker. To that extent, our staff developed a bill that I believe is a very good bill. A bill, however, that was badly maligned by big oil. It was badly maligned by big oil with the view that the more negative they could put at this bill, the sooner it would go away, because the interest that we were trying to protect, Mr. Speaker, was small business, rural operators here in Nova Scotia and the consumers of Nova Scotia. And I am so disappointed, and I was so disappointed then, that the opposition parties bought that line, hook, line, and sinker, Mr. Speaker. And what has happened is since then, a year has gone by, one solid year, without the protection that Nova Scotians can deserve and can afford, Mr. Speaker. One solid year. And for the member opposite to say that government brings bills in and out of Law Amendments Committee, that is completely untrue, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite knows, he's been here longer than I have, that because they have a majority in that committee, all they have to do is ask the chairman of that committee to consider that bill, and that bill can be considered. And the member opposite knows that as a minister of this government, I don't have the authority to ask for that bill to be considered. It's only members in that committee, Mr. Speaker. So for him to mislead this House and mislead Nova Scotians and mislead the people in the audience is both unfair and not true, Mr. Speaker. It is just unfair. I want to say that I've taken this issue very seriously. People have brought to me a great deal of concern and issues. I've had issues brought to me around fair practices in the gas and oil business. To that extent, Mr. Speaker, myself and my staff traveled to Ottawa to meet with people at Industry Canada. And we talked about the concerns here in Nova Scotia. We talked about the threat of dominance in the marketplace, how the big operators are squeezing the little guys. We talked about the concern that was raised to me by small operators about the use of Canadian Tire money and how that is an incentive to pull away customers, and how the use of points for large retail food stores is an incentive to pull away customers. And I told the people in Industry Canada that that is a concern for Nova Scotians, and they've agreed that it's a concern for all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I talked about issues around collusion, and every time I say that, oddly enough, I get a nasty letter from some oil executive who says, you better point out the facts, be careful, or there's a threat of litigation against what you're saying. What I've said in the past is people have brought these issues to my attention, and it's my duty and responsibility to bring it to the attention of the federal government, and I did that, Mr. Speaker. And I will continue to do that. There are other unfair practices that are going on in this marketplace. That's why we brought forward Bill number 79. That's why Bill number 79 will protect the interest of small operators in rural Nova Scotia. That's why Bill 79 will protect the interest of consumers. Mr. Speaker, I have spent countless hours talking about, meeting with, and discussing this issue with many, many Nova Scotians. I have received hundreds and thousands of letters. And the one thing that people have in common is they want fairness, and they want to be treated fair by their oil companies. Mr. Speaker, I read just recently the annual report of Imperial Oil, 125 years in energy leadership. And I can say to you, I don't believe in Nova Scotia we're necessarily getting the kind of leadership and the kind of protection that they need. Bill 79 would provide for that. The annual report shows clearly that the one thing that's going up, in addition to gas prices, is shareholder revenues. And the one thing that we can do in this legislature is work together to resolve this. The member opposite accuses me of being pig-headed and sticking to the principles. Well, the principles of our bill, Mr. Speaker, protect Nova Scotians. It's all about protecting small operators, rural Nova Scotians, and the consumers, Mr. Speaker. That's what the bill's all about. Ironically enough, the day that I introduced Bill 79, I also introduced a resolution that was passed by this House unanimously to allow for an all-party committee to go out and do some work, to consult with people like the people who are in the audience today. They brought back a report to government. Government has received that report, and we've acted on a number of initiatives. But, Mr. Speaker, what we haven't been able to act on is the recommendation around regulation. And why is that, Mr. Speaker? It's clear and it's simple, because the opposition parties sided together to block that piece of legislation from being voted on and even debated here in these chambers, Mr. Speaker. This is where that bill needs to be debated, right here in these chambers, so that we can then determine the merits of this piece of legislation. We brought that bill forward in good spirit. We believe that it was the right approach. We still believe it's the right approach, and we believe that it will protect Nova Scotians' interest. I want to say that I have taken a great deal of time to think about this, and I've read the opposition members' legislation on this issue. They have many of them, Mr. Speaker. In the past, they had legislation that would require full service across the province, and I'm not saying it's a good idea or a bad idea, but I can tell you that I've spoken to a number of small retailers who said this would cause them a great deal of anxiety. And I've read their legislation they tabled today, and ironically enough, when you read their newest legislation and Bill 79, which we believe is a piece of legislation that will work for Nova Scotia, many of the clauses are exactly the same. In fact, you have to work your way down that bill almost three-quarters of the way through it before you find a difference. And, Mr. Speaker, I don't think we're philosophically different on this. I think particularly the New Democrats and ourselves agree with most of the concerns that have been raised by retailers. We agree with the solution. I guess the difference that we find is how we implement that solution. I can tell you this government is very interested in moving forward with Bill 79 so that we can protect the interests of Nova Scotians. I put a lot of work into this bill. This side of the House put a lot of work into this bill. We believe it's the right approach, and it's the correct approach to protect Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you that I know the impact of doing nothing. I know what the impact of doing nothing would be, Mr. Speaker. The impact would mean the loss of jobs in communities that desperately need those jobs. The impact would mean the loss of profit in a business that is marginal at best today. That's why we brought forward Bill 79. That's why we believe it's the right approach. And that's why I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed on the 18th of May, the 19th of May, when, after our bill, much maligned and described as something it absolutely is not, found its way to a shelf in the Red Room as a result of the opposition parties teaming together. But what disappoints me even more than that, what really disappoints me even more than that, Mr. Speaker, is when members of the opposition, particularly the New Democrats, point to government and say government's in the way. That is not the case. The government has said all along, you bring that bill back into committee, you make sure we can get that bill back into committee, we can bring it into this House, we can debate the merits of this bill where it needs to be debated on the floor of this legislature, and we can, Mr. Speaker, and we can resolve the issues, that Nova Scotians face. Mr. Speaker, the members in the gallery opposite, Nova Scotians at home, they don't need petty partisan politics to play a role in this. What they need is a real solution. The real solution exists in Bill 79. It's unfair to them, it's unfair to Nova Scotians, and all this will do is create undue anxiety and delay. We know and we've seen stations close in this province. Mr. Speaker, I want to, and I'll table this, our department has done a great deal of research since deregulation, and I can tell you that Nova Scotia has seen the decline of gasoline stations here year after year after year. In some cases, no greater than other provinces. Prince Edward Island in the last couple of years have seen a greater decline in retail outlets in Nova Scotia. But these are small businesses, the businesses that we need to protect, the businesses that the members on this side of the House are committed to, the businesses that Bill number 79 will ensure stay alive and vibrant and provide a valuable and much-needed service for people here at home, for people in Yarmouth, for people in Argyll, and people in Cheticamp. These are businesses that are cornerstones of their communities. This is not just a place where people buy gas, Mr. Speaker. It's a place where people meet, where people talk about the issues of the day. These are part of the fabric of rural Nova Scotia. They're part of who we are and what we're about, Mr. Speaker. As I've indicated, we've seen a decline. Bill 79 will stop that decline. It gives government the tools and the authority and the jurisdiction to regulate that business, to provide for the kind of protection that those operators need, deserve, and expect from their government, Mr. Speaker. It provides for the kind of protection that Nova Scotians need, deserve, and protect against big oil, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you nothing sickens me more than to see the tremendous profit being raked by Esso. I don't think it's fair, and I think it hurts Nova Scotians. It particularly hurts these folks here. So I'm encouraging the members opposite to support our piece of legislation, to do the right thing for the people in the audience. Do the right thing for these folks. Do the right thing for Nova Scotians. Bring forward Bill 79. Bring it out of Law Amendments Committee. Allow the debate to happen here on the floor of this House, Mr. Speaker. Do the right thing. Don't confuse them. Don't confuse Nova Scotians with political rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I will tell the members opposite.
Point of order. Point of order. The Honourable Member for Eastern Passage, Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important for the minister to know, as a point of order, that any time his Minister of Justice, who's chair of the Law Amendments Committee, wants to call that bill for debate, we're ready to debate it. It's up to him to call it, and we're ready to call it and talk about it at any time.
Order. Time has expired. Point of order. The Honourable Minister, and point of order.
The member knows that is not necessarily the truth. That members on the opposite side can call on that bill too, Mr. Speaker. He's been around here long enough. He knows the difference, Mr. Speaker, and I'd ask you to rule on that.
Order. I recognize the Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope my run over my lost time is added on to the end. Mr. Speaker, I spent last summer I was a member of the committee, and I chose to be on the committee because I feel and truly believe that you have to help people. You're elected to help the people that you serve. And we traveled this province and we heard heart-wrenching and gut-wrenching stories of people that were trying to survive, literally scrounging and scraping from pillar to post to try to make a living. And Mr. Speaker, what I want to refer to is an editorial that was in the Cape Breton Post where it says their profit margins approaching zero, the high price of gas and the threat to small independent retailers. That's the two main articles. The high price of gas. Recently, I said this last week in the House, I stopped at Johnny Eller's service station in Waikagama on the way coming up because I know that he has a lot of truckers that go in there. I told him Robert McClellan was paying $1.18 for diesel down in Bay St. Lawrence to fuel his fishing boat. Mr. Eller was selling it for 95 cents a litre in Waikagama, and the truckers that were coming in from Toronto were telling him that they were buying it for 75 cents a litre in Ontario. Something has to be done, Mr. Speaker. I'll quote again. Barnett seeks support for gas price bill. This is Friday, April the 1st, in the Herald. Dave Collins of Wilson Fuels, his quote on that was, the only person that is striking up the band for Barry Barnett, Mr. Collins said, this legislation has all the hallmarks of ready, fire, and then aim. So I guess as a big person in the business, he doesn't think much of the present bill. But Mr. Speaker, I would like, and I know if this is a democracy and which we all fight and represent and work toward, I would personally like to see that bill called. I'm wondering why that bill was not called in this session of the legislature. Because I get calls all the time as being a member of the committee, what are you going to do about it? When is something going to happen? I'm going to read here from letters that says my voice counts. Now this is from David McRae in Bedeck about something different, but he says my voice counts. He's one of the ones that was telling me, and I told this committee, that after 30-odd years in business, that man is going to be forced to get out of selling gas. And the letter that he signed says my voice counts, but I guess the little guy in the corner, it doesn't count, because I've heard it from coast to coast here, and about the unruly or unnecessary or unethical maybe more, Mr. Speaker, about what the big gas guzzlers, and I'm not talking about SUVs, I'm talking about the gas guzzling companies that like to guzzle the money from the small guy, the greed, I'm talking about them. But close the service stations, hang the little guy out to dry, let him shrivel up and forget about him. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know about in the big, large areas, but since I've been elected in 1991, I've been fighting for the little rural areas where I represented Victoria, and now I represent Victoria, the Lakes, the riding. And Mr. Speaker, I was down in Middle River recently, and I go past Jimmy's service station, gone. The pumps are gone on the concrete foundation that's there, and he's got an all-terrain vehicle advertised, trying to make a living selling all-terrain vehicles. With that gone, he's the person that would open the service station at 3 in the morning to help refuel the fire truck if it was needed, or to help out a neighbor who required help in the middle of the night or in the middle of an emergency, as we so recently experienced with the loss of power in the rural areas. A service station in a rural area is not just a service station. It's an integral part of the infrastructure of the community. And I hear members of the government side of the House agreeing with me. And Mr. Speaker, that's why, if there's agreement over there, I would really like to have appreciated if the minister had brought that bill forward again. And Mr. Speaker, I'm looking at responses from the Minister of Municipal Relations. Anytime I've written him a letter, he's immediately responded. And he seems that and I know that he does good work anything I've dealt with him, he's responded quickly. But I'm at a loss to understand why this bill has not been called or recalled, whatever the proper terminology is, after it left the debates over in the Red Room. And I look at here, December the 15th, PEI drivers are going to get a holiday break on the price of gasoline. Well, they say that the regulation doesn't work around here, but PEI seems to be more stable, and they don't have this up and down at the pumps, and I don't think that there's any of their rural stations going out of business like they are over here. Mr. Speaker, I can take these papers out one after the other and go through them, but I can't help think of the young couple who approached us, the lady with tears in her eyes, after receiving advice from a very successful gas station operator who was now on his third station. And apparently everything he did, like he said, it seemed to turn to gold. And he was doing really well. And then suddenly when he got locked into a 15-year agreement with a very large multinational, the roof caved in. That gentleman pumped 7 million liters of gasoline last year and is not making money. Now you tell me what's wrong with that picture. He'll have to start selling I guess you'll clean the windshield and try and sell you a hamburger on the side so he can make a half a dollar. But there's something drastically wrong. But it was the advice of that gentleman, because he was doing so well and with his enthusiasm, helped another young couple take over a service station.
Would the honourable member accept a question?
No, Mr. Speaker, I have too much of this to go through. I don't want to. I've lost some time at the beginning, and I'd like to cover
20
everything
seconds. It's about 20 seconds is all you lost.
Well, Mr. Speaker, look, I've got everything here that I want, and I waited 20 seconds to get the floor as it was. And with due respect to the honourable member, I would like the opportunity to complete what it is that I have to say. Mr. Speaker, Ewell Auto Works, a letter here, April the 11th, 2005. So these letters that I'm quoting are in April 2005. We did the tour of the province, the All Select Committee, last year, and still I'm getting information in 2005. It hasn't gone away. The problem hasn't been resolved. People need to be helped, and we have to do something for them. And Mr. Speaker, I have highlighted in there the
order.
Yes.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The point of order, and certainly for your mindset to determine whether it is or not. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, the legislation of 1995 that was approved by a Liberal administration, designed specifically to depopulate rural Nova Scotia, is a contributing factor to what's happening to many of the small station operators in rural Nova Scotia.
Order. It's not a point of order. The honourable member for Victoria Lakes, you have the floor.
Mr. Speaker, that former Liberal, presently an independent, soon to be a Tory, I'm dealing with the present, Mr. Speaker, not the past. We've got a problem here today, and that's what we have to contend with. Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman would like to play back and forth, but I intend to stick to my topic, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to quote from an email that I received, petroleum pricing regulations, Mr. Speaker, and everywhere I turn, Mr. Speaker, you get, like I said, McRae's Home Hardware, you get Middle River, people that were established in business for years. I think of the young couple again down there. I don't want to mention the area because they were very heartbroken and distraught about the business situation, trying to raise a young family, have a home, and invested everything into a business, only to be trapped, Mr. Speaker. So there must be a way that the present government can help them out. A letter from the signed by the Premier himself, Mr. Speaker, in response to a letter from to Mr. Graham Conrad, March 23rd, 2005, and it states, and I'll just quote from one part from the Premier's letter, Government has not yet decided on any action regarding the regulation of petroleum product prices at this time. This position may change in the future should developments in the marketplace warrant such action. So, Mr. Speaker, that's kind of contradictory to what the Honourable Minister of Municipal Relations had informed us. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to see that in fact, maybe what I will do is copy this to the Honourable Minister to remind him that maybe he should talk to the Premier and see about bringing the bill forward. Mr. Speaker, I'll quote from Tuesday, March the 22nd, 2005 again. Kiwanis Club continues to fight for gas price regulation. That's down in Cape Breton, down in my area. And Mr. Speaker, it just shows that it's from one end of the province to the other. And Mr. Conrad is continually writing letters on behalf of the Gasoline Retail Association. The Retail Gasoline Association, Mr. Speaker, as seeing their members shrink. They're not, I guess, maybe what I should refer to, Mr. Speaker, is this black folder that I have my documentation in. And that's not by accident, that's by purpose, because it's for the...
I'll ask the honourable member to table the documents he's been reading from.
Mr. Speaker, if I can table those as soon as I finish.
Thank you.
I will more than likely do that. And to go back to the topic that I was saying, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, this here is in black out of respect for those retailers who have lost their business. Basically, their business has died. And that's why I keep the gas tax file in black, Mr. Speaker, and we'll put a white one on there when the government moves forward and we do something. Quoting from the letter to the Premier and signed by Mr. Conrad, my purpose in writing reflects the concern of the hundreds of independent retailers who feel the government does not fully understand the continuing severity of this issue upon retailers. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Conrad talks about the issue on retailers, and let's take it a little further. Not only the retailers, they are the employers in the rural areas and in the towns and in the cities. They are our family members, they are community members. You take the income away from one of those employers, and you not only affect that employer, but you affect the workers that they have and their families also. The Gasoline Retailers Association is an absolute industry which is very, it was very alive and prevalent in the province of Nova Scotia. But now, Mr. Speaker, it looks like it's going to be one of the demise of one of the businesses that for years was the stalwart of the towns and the country section. It was nice to go for a drive and pull into a rural service station, fuel up, and just find very warm conversation on any given day, and just to make yourself familiar with the communities of the rural areas. Mr. Speaker, it's been mentioned also that one of our members, my colleague, that wrote up his own report, and I just highlighted some of the things from there. So he shares the concern of the majority about whether some oil companies have been oppressive in their business dealings with retailers, and I can agree with that. Give the Competition Bureau or the provincial arm of the government the authority and resources to thoroughly investigate the activity of large oil companies in setting the crude and refiner prices. Mr. Speaker, I think we should also bring in other jurisdictions so that we don't have to do this alone. And to continue to quote from the document, there should be a general complaint concerning the actions of suppliers to retailers, price squeezing by the suppliers of fuel to the stations operated by, and I won't name the people that are already there, but it's prevalent that everybody is not being treated equal and they're pitting one retailer against the other.
Order. Time has expired for the Liberals. I'll recognize the honourable member for Pictou West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to be able to rise here for a few minutes and speak on Resolution 4077, introduced by my colleague from Cape Breton Centre on a very, very important issue here to rural Nova Scotia and to all Nova Scotians. And
in the resolution that he's introduced, it mentions some of the problems that are being faced by consumers and by gas retailers. They're struggling with high prices and thin margins, and it's having an impact all across our province. And time and time again, they and we and consumers and others have been bringing this forward to government to try to find a solution. And it just amazes me, Mr. Speaker, and how the wheels of government roll sometime. I've heard from the Liberal Party and that they fully support regulation. I've heard from the members of this caucus, in other words, the opposition is fully in support of gasoline regulation. I've heard from the minister and others stating, yes, it's a real problem, a real concern. And so I think we all agree that, we need to get on with this and get protection for consumers and protection for retailers. And so I'm amazed at what is the process that's holding us up here. Now, the government can blame the opposition, and the opposition can say, no, it's the government that's not doing it. Anyway, the net result is that for whatever technical reason is not being looked after here, the retailers and the consumers of this province are hurting. And we heard from many at the Select Committee. We've heard since then that there's real problems with more and more retailers going out of business. So why can't we, as mature individuals, as representatives of the people, get this on and get it done? And so that we can protect rural communities and protect consumers and protect retailers. It's been said that Bill 79 was stayed at committee, and that's true, but it was only after the Select Committee had been formed, and then, we didn't need, at that moment, the Bill 79 until the Select Committee came back and reported, which has been done now for 8 months. And so that's the only reason it was stayed at that time. But I think all of us on both sides of the House are saying, let's get on with regulation. And Mr. Speaker, you're one of the individuals like I that signed off on the Select Committee. Right. We said, yes, let's do regulation. Or I guess our first choice was divorcement, but that was quickly shot down. So then we said, regulation is our next choice. Let's do it. And members of your caucus as well, the member from Eastern Shore, the chair of the committee, said, yes, let's bring on regulation. The member from Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley signed off on the report and said, yes, it's the right thing to do to protect consumers, to protect retailers, to protect our communities. The member from Cape Breton West was a member of the committee at that time, and he said the same thing. I'll sign off on this report and allow for protection of consumers and retailers and our communities. So I don't know where or why we're being held up here in technicalities and if it's political bickering or whatever, but the most important thing that we need to look after are the people that we represent, and those are the consumers that live in our villages and towns and hamlets. It's the independent business people that run a service station and try to make a living. And as we heard certainly loud and clear at the Select Committee public hearings, that they're in trouble. They're having real problems. And they're over and over again, we heard about how thin their margins were and how little money they were actually making. And that's the problem. That's the crux of the problem here. When retailers can't make a decent living, they're going to go out of business. And we had 28 already this year that have been lost. And the idea is that probably more than 100 others will disappear this year in 2005 unless we as legislators do something to bring this on and get regulation. We heard over and over from people that this is what they want. Now, earlier this afternoon, I had the opportunity to table a petition on behalf of 51 retailers from around the province that have called for regulation. They know it's the only way they're going to survive and that they can carry on a business that will be able to offer gasoline or other services to their customers and to their communities. On the very first day this House opened, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to table a petition on behalf of 3,470 Pictonians who said, yes, we want regulation, and that was from 16 different service stations or outlets in Pictou County that said it's time that we regulate gasoline in Nova Scotia. We had regulation up until 1991 when the government of the day chose to deregulate and take it away. At that time, we had more than 1,000 stations in the province, and today that's dropped to below 500 and rapidly decreasing almost weekly. I lost a service station in the town of Pictou just last fall. It was no longer able to carry on, and they had the Petro-Canada there that had operated for 60 years or more is gone. It's no longer able to operate. Mr. Speaker, the same thing happened in your riding, in the riding of Pictou East in the village of Hopewell. There was a retailer, Cyril Fraser, that had to close his doors in February, again because he's not making a margin. And it's the same thing with many of our retailers that are here today. They're just not able to survive. And it's just, there's something wrong with this picture. Many of us are from rural Nova Scotia. Many of the members of the government side are from rural Nova Scotia, from Colchester North or Argyll or King South and all kinds of other ridings around the province. So these are the people that we represent. These are the people that are here today. And they're begging, they're urging the government to come forward and get this on. I think earlier it was suggested that the Law Amendments Committee is the mechanism that can allow this to happen, and that's true. That's where this Bill 79 is stuck at the moment. I would urge the chairman of the Law Amendments Committee, who is a government member, to bring this forward and let's talk it out and get the best possible bill for Nova Scotians, and so that we can survive as a province and let the service continue in our rural communities. The Select Committee recommended a number of things. That it looked at the PEI model that is working over there. They've had that for a few years now, and it provides stability for consumers. And for the whole month, they know what they're going to pay for the price of fuel. If it's 89.9 or whatever, then that's what it stays at for 30 days, unless there's major interruptions in the New York Harbor market, and then they may have to look at an adjustment. But generally, it's true for 30 days. People know what they're going to pay. They can budget for it, and it's working. Are retailers in Prince Edward Island going out of business? No, they're not. I haven't heard of a single retailer disappearing from PEI. They're stable. They're making a minimum margin. They're able to carry on, and they have a 1.5 cent difference in their margin there between the maximum they can charge and the minimum they can charge. But it seems to be working there, the regulated gasoline market. More recently, Newfoundland has brought on regulation. Now, they do things a little bit different over there, in that the island is divided into regions. I believe there's 7 different regions with a different pricing structure in each region. But generally, it seems to be working. I just want to quote, if I can, Mr. Speaker, briefly from the Newfoundland regulations. And their components of a maximum price over there. They first of all, they set a benchmark price. It's based on the Platts or the Bloomberg's market price. And once they have that, then they add in the total allowed markup for the retailer. There's a minimum margin that the retailer gets in order to survive.
Order, member. The point of order to the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
I just wanted to bring to the attention of the House in the dissertation from the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations. He did talk about how many gas stations have been lost to PEI as well. And there's been actually a 26% change, or negative 26% change, of gas retailers on PEI as well.
Thank you, member. The honourable member for Pictou West.
As I was saying, in Newfoundland, they have a structure that allows for price setting that is set by the URERB there, or the URB, and the benchmark price. Then they add the retailer's margin into it. Then taxes are added on, and finally any allowable service costs. But the consumers know for the whole month what they're going to pay. If there's an unusual flow up and down in the prices, then they can meet interim month to change that. Retailers can also apply to have the price reduced if they feel they want to sell for less. But anyway, their structure there has been in place now for a couple years, and everything we hear, it's indicated that it is working, and it's working in PEI, it's working in Newfoundland, and it certainly could work in Nova Scotia. So maybe we can take the best of what's available from each of those two provinces and see what could work for Nova Scotians. We have two different models on either side of us that are working. Let's take the best of what's available there and see what could work for the benefit of our retailers and our consumers and our communities. I guess I mentioned one other thing that was the minister had mentioned about the disabled. Certainly we're in favor of finding some mechanism that would allow full service for our disabled community, and I'm sure that could be worked out, that those people that can't pump their own gas could have a mechanism that somebody could serve them. So, Mr. Speaker, what are the benefits? Why are we talking about regulation? What is it that this bill or these regulations would do if properly done through the UIRB here in Nova Scotia? Well, I think first of all, for consumers, the benefit is that it provides stability. People know for the whole 30 days that they can budget, they know what they're going to pay. If it's 90 cents a litre, then that stays that price right through till the end of the month. And they know too that their corner store or corner gas station is going to be there. If we continue on the way we are, our retailers are going to be gone. Many of our communities are going to be without a service station, and so that's going to hurt consumers. It's certainly a disincentive or not a benefit if you have to drive 30 miles into town to fill up your gas tank in your vehicle, or if you need to get your lawnmower, you're cutting the grass on Saturday morning and you need to get a tank full of gas. If it's there in the local community, then it's a convenience and it works for everybody. For local farmers, they can come down and drive their tractor in and get gassed up. It's a benefit to them. They don't have to drive way into the urban center to get fuel. It was pointed out by my colleague from Cape Breton Centre. It's a benefit for fire departments. They can go right in their own community and receive the fuel. But I think another benefit then certainly for our retailers is that they know that they can plan. They can get a business plan together. They can go to their financial institution and say, Mr. Banker, we're going to expand. We're going to add another bay or whatever. If they know that they have a decent margin they can live on, they can plan for the future and know that they'll add to their business or expand and thrive. And I think most important, Mr. Speaker, there's benefits to the community. When the service station really is the center of the community, it's often the convenience store, there's service bays. People have confidence when they have a community that has the extras in it. They build houses, they expand their businesses, our schools keep open. Gas stations really are an essential service in our community. So thousands of Nova Scotians want it, retailers want it, our communities will be much stronger if we have regulated gas. So let's get it on, let's move forward and make it happen here in Nova Scotia.
For Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, and before I recognize you, Minister, I just want to rule, the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations asked me to rule on the status of Bill 79. It is in the hands of the committee. It cannot be recalled by the Minister. It can only be recalled by the committee. I recognize the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I'm glad to have 30 seconds to discuss this issue, simply because there are 5 independent retailers in my riding, and most of them are here today. And I just wanted to bring to the attention of the House that simply we really need to do something. And maybe we disagree on the means to the end. We all agree on the end. So what we need to do is call Bill number 79 in the committee and get it debated and help out these folks.
Order. Order. I'll recognize the Honourable House Leader for the official opposition on calling the next bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you please call Bill number 212?
Bill number 212. And I'll recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland. No, I am so sorry, Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can't tell you how much I welcome the chance to speak to this bill. I believe it is a fundamental piece of legislation which needs to be enacted in Nova Scotia. Some of the worst injustices are those which are perpetrated on people who do not know that it is taking place. Bill 212 addresses such an injustice. As we know, the cost of medication, the cost of health services, the cost of hospitalization, and all of the additional costs of illness can be crippling. A large proportion of personal bankruptcies in the United States, admittedly, are attributable quite simply to medical costs which cannot be met by the individual needing that care. People go broke attempting to buy the medicines that will keep them alive, to get the operations done which are essential, or to simply to get a hospital room. That's not the case in Canada. But even so, we have a number of uninsured services. And if you do not belong to a health insurance plan, if you are not a subscriber to a health insurance plan, the cost of your medication can be every bit as crippling as it is to anybody living in the United States. And those crippling costs can be passed on, in fact, to all of the members of your family. Mind you, we have a safeguard here. The safeguard is health insurance plans. Many employers offer a very valuable benefit, which is that of being able to subscribe to a group health insurance plan. Unfortunately, however, we don't stay employed by the same employer for a lifetime. And there are many people who discover too late that they are no longer eligible to be covered by the group health insurance plan which has sheltered them for so long. In fact, the longer that they have been sheltered by that plan, the worse their situation. Let me give you an example. A 42-year-old woman who has been married for 15 years. During the course of that time, since she was 27 years old, she has been to the doctor for stomach aches. She has been to the doctor for headaches. She has had a child. A number of other things may have happened. Diabetes may have developed in her family. At divorce, at the age of 42, she is no longer the spouse of a member of a group health insurance plan. She needs to get, for herself and her children, new health insurance. She goes to a health insurer, and she asks for individual coverage. Every single consultation she has made to a doctor in the 15 preceding years between 27 and 42 is all of a sudden up for grabs. If she ever is prescribed medication in her life for stomach aches, for headaches, anything else about which she may have consulted a doctor, she will have to pay for any medication resulting, and that's for a lifetime. The same is true of her children. Take the example of a 60-year-old woman whose husband dies. He has a group health insurance plan through his employer. They have been married for 37 years. Everything that has happened to her in 37 years until the age of 60 is now a pre-existing condition. When she is 65, pharmacare will help her out with the costs of medications. But in the interim, she must buy herself a limited health insurance plan, which will cover almost nothing if you look at what comes up in the course of 37 years. And she will have to pay all of the expenses, which are accrued for 5 years. If she cannot pay those expenses, she may find herself in community services assistance. Extended pharmacare will help her out. However, in other jurisdictions, it is not the responsibility of the government to accept what is being downloaded on it by private insurers. In other jurisdictions, there is a right for anybody leaving a group health insurance plan to apply for new insurance, as long as they do it very quickly, which is usually 30 days, to apply for new insurance on the same terms and conditions as their preceding coverage. That means that there is some continuous protection. In places like Connecticut, in places like California, Illinois, in fact, in every state of the United States, there is a regulatory scheme there which makes sure that insurers do in fact bear the burden of what they have undertaken to do, which is to insure health conditions. And I find it really extraordinary that here in Nova Scotia, health insurers undertake to insure people, but at the first hint of an out, they can take it. Because when anyone has to leave a group health insurance plan here in Nova Scotia, they have not got the chance to receive continued coverage. There's another feature as well of health insurance protection in the United States, which I was rather amazed to see. Not that it's a bad thing, but that it's far more than one would think of immediately. Here, when you apply for health insurance, there's a lengthy questionnaire, and it says, have you ever been treated for any of the following or diagnosed with? And that's a long checklist. Those things become excluded conditions, if you have ever. And if you don't answer truthfully, I'm quite sure that the insurers will, and there is any consequence to that, I'm sure that the insurers find out. However, in the United States, that questionnaire reads only, have you been treated for these conditions in the preceding X months, X years? And if those conditions are not manifest for a length of time, then those conditions are considered not to exist any longer. And that seems to me to be only fair, because we're living long lives these days, but our jobs are short. Sometimes the lives of our spouses or marriages are short, far shorter than a lifetime. And when it happens that a group insurance plan can no longer take care of some of the people it was intended to take, it was bought to take care of, then people are thrown onto their own resources, their families' resources, and finally, if it gets really bad, onto the province's resources. I believe, Madam Speaker, that we should be making sure that Nova Scotians are protected in the same way people in other jurisdictions are protected. Nova Scotians who are insured, and in fact, put it bluntly, Nova Scotian taxpayers as well, because we are paying premiums to health insurance companies to take care of certain expenses. And the actuarial estimates which are made assume certain lengths of time on that insurance. It's a windfall for an insurance company every time a dependent leaves, every time an insured dies and all their dependents are forced off that group insurance plan. And unfortunately, the cost of that windfall is a cost that Nova Scotians are bearing. And that, to me, Madam Speaker, seems not only unfair and unwise, but something whose time has come. So, Madam Speaker, with that, I would hope very much that this bill will find its way to further examination, that there will be a common sense appraisal of it, and that we will, in fact, bring into existence in this jurisdiction the kind of regime which exists elsewhere and enables those who are paid to do a job, that is to say insurers, to do the job they are paid to do, or in fact requires them to do so. There's another little bit too which I think is important, because one of the things that has surprised me is when I first began mentioning this kind of condition to people, they reacted with absolute panic. Most people were quite unaware of this, and some very surprising people are unaware that they may be protected, but they are protected only temporarily. and that it is false security which is offered to them during the time that they are covered by a group health insurance plan. It is very much a false security, and in fact, the sooner they get off that plan, the better they are in many cases. So people have come to me with all sorts of really unnerving stories, and it is the kind of thing which people with chronic lung disease, diabetes, cancer, mental illnesses, heart disease, all of these things, all of these people living with chronic conditions stand to be exposed to crippling financial circumstances if in fact they are not protected as they should be. So, Madam Speaker, with that I will sit down, hoping that this legislation will in fact move to further investigation. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member from Queens.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm very pleased to rise today to speak on Bill 212 on an act respecting the protection and the portability of health insurance. And I listened intently as the member who introduced the bill was speaking, and I think as MLAs in the House, most have had opportunity where people have come to visit our offices and have had discussions with us where there have been circumstances that have been beyond their control that have caused them great hardship, and it's made their life very difficult. And this may be something that we can look at to see if there's a way that we can provide some type of protection to allow these people to be able to live a bit more comfortably in the event of a devastating loss within their family. I'd like to say I think certainly the intentions of the bill are good. I know in a short discussion with the member opposite, I know she's done a lot of research. I know she has looked at this. It is another jurisdiction, and we also did discuss, or will continue to discuss, that there does need to be some discussion with additional stakeholders to make sure that we have crossed every T and dotted every I prior to a bill similar to this going forward. And I believe that we can do some consultation and some homework to make sure that we identify what the issues are with the bill and to determine if there are, I guess, corrections or improvements that we might make. And I know that we could do that. There are the exploration of where the issues are is the one thing. The bill was just introduced last Friday, so there hasn't been a great deal of time, and certainly not a great deal of time by the department to review this and to do a jurisdictional review and to find out what other areas are doing for comparison purposes. So there does need to be some exploration out in the field to find out where we are and what we're actually looking at, and that seems to be the biggest issue right now. The intentions of the bill certainly seem good, but with respect to the details and what it can mean, and I think everybody in the House can appreciate sometimes when we can rush something through, it's almost like an unintentional bycatch, I guess is what I've used for a phrase, where we include or gather some things that we really didn't intend to. So we certainly all know from our dealings with auto insurance over the past number of months that insurance is always a complex issue. There are many details that have to be looked at. We have to, I guess, review a lot of things to be sure that we're doing a comprehensive study prior to moving anything forward in the House. And as I said before, I know there was a great deal of research that went into the bill. It doesn't appear that there really has been any consultation up to this period of time, and consultation would be the one tool that we would want to use to be sure that the 125 or so companies that provide health and accident and sickness insurance in Nova Scotia have been involved, and also there are a great number of groups and individuals who would also be affected by this act. The intentions of the bill certainly are good, as I stated. I think that to improve the availability of insurance for Nova Scotians is something that we certainly can work together at. And that's certainly something that is very important for the province and for all the residents of the province. And while some of these suggestions certainly have merit, I think we do need to take some time for some very extensive analysis to determine the full extent of the legislation. And that's the one thing that we certainly, in the department, would certainly be committed to. We'd want to make sure that we did full investigation and that we, so to speak, turned over every stone to ensure that we knew exactly what it was that we were looking for. There are a few things that I'd like to point out, Madam Speaker, with respect to some of the details of the bill. First, I think we need to make it known or reiterate that we have a Sound Insurance Act in the province, and that act does address pre-existing conditions. And it doesn't define the term pre-existing conditions, which of course this bill before us attempts to do. And the key point in the definition is that it proposes to reduce the time frames for being eligible for benefits from a pre-existing condition from 24 months to down to 6 months. And certainly on the surface, we see that as a very positive thing for someone who's sick. It's also a very significant change that would take place within the insurance program. As I have said, it requires a closer look. When we talk about group health insurance plans, they are numerous, and there are many facets and assets to them, which complicate, I guess, just looking at moving this bill certainly forward quickly by any means. The couple of examples that were put forward with regards to people and how long they had been married, or if a spouse passes, and how they can be left with no coverage or very little coverage, or coverage for a very short period of time, is something that, again, concerns all of us. And we're always striving to see if we can come up with systems that will give people protection, especially those people who assumed they had protection. And the point was made very well that there are people out there who believe that they have the type of protection that they need for the long term, and then something can happen. There can be a sickness in the family or the loss of a job, and people believe that these benefits are going to continue. And unfortunately, that may not be the case. And upon investigation, these people can find themselves in a very difficult situation. The excluded conditions, we do have excluded conditions that were mentioned, and something that needs to be explored. We need to find out what the conditions would be, look at those. There are the issues with regards to questionnaires that are filled out or would be filled out, the details of what these questions are. There are many bits and pieces of information that we certainly have to explore, certainly within the department, to before we would be able, certainly, or willing to do anything with this bill. I've certainly asked the department to take a look at this, and we just realized it was coming forward yesterday. We've had the Superintendent of Insurance review the bill and make some comments and some observations. However, he's had very limited time to take a look at this legislation, or to have any kind of a review with other legislation that is across, I guess, North America. And as well, we had discussions this morning in the department with regards to the bill to determine, I guess, the content, and to see what we could do to review it, to make sure that we have the information that we need, and I guess to do the analysis. And one of the issues with regards to the analysis would be, a critical analysis of the bill, because that would certainly be our job, to make sure that we outline and determine what the obstacles would be, what the issues would be, what the concerns would be from a piece of legislation like this moving forward. So that's something that has started, certainly only briefly, but it is something that we have started. I am pleased to stand up today and say that we're willing to look at this and we'd work with the member to review this. And Section 3 of the bill attempts to improve the availability of health insurance by requiring an insurer to cover a condition if no medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment was recommended within 12 months of the beginning of coverage. And I do have some concerns there, Madam Speaker, that this type of provision may tempt, and I just say may tempt, and it's an observation, some people to delay getting care in order to qualify under the provision. And I certainly would hope that that wouldn't be the case, but these are the types of issues that we will be looking at and would like to look at prior to anything moving forward in this House. And that could make certainly the health situation of an individual much worse if for any reason they delayed getting care to ensure that they were covered by a group action plan. So it certainly has merits, but also does require additional analysis. And I guess the one offer I would make would be that the member opposite who introduced the bill from Halifax Atlantic contact people within the department, and we'll make sure that they have an opportunity to discuss the issues, discuss their research, and make sure that they understand each other's points of view and see if there is common ground and a way that there could be some movement forward. I think that all aspects of the bill, Section 4, 5, and 6, which go together, certainly seem to have the most merit. It'll ensure that Nova Scotians don't lose coverage just because they may be covered under a new plan. And I agree that it's valuable to provide this kind of coverage. I think we certainly all appreciate the value of this type of coverage, especially since people may find themselves in positions where changing plans and insurance carriers is something out of their control. And the point was made that the jobs sometimes tend to be short these days, and certainly that is just a fact of life in today's society. People do move from job to job certainly more often than they ever have before, and that brings this issue to the forefront as well. And as well, when an insured spouse passes, would be one example when people's lives would change considerably. And there's no saying, I guess the other part, what premiums companies may charge for this kind of continuing coverage, and that's an issue that we'd want to explore, and we wouldn't want to see a premium that was so high that it would be exclusive and would stop anyone from being able to get the kind of coverage anyway. So this would be part of the consultation that we'd need to do to obtain estimates of what costs would be, or get the best guesstimate, I guess we would call it, or estimate of the cost, and that's something certainly that is important without a doubt. So the other concern, there are a couple of issues with some of the sections, but something that we would certainly look at. And I guess in concluding, Madam Speaker, the bill certainly has merit. It does lack the consultation which we need, and it lacks the proper analysis, but that is something that we can look for. So therefore, I will ask the department, or have asked the department to review the bill, do some of the consultation, and determine if we may be able to look forward to having this bill looked at in the fall.
The honourable member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there's no question that the goal of this bill is laudable, and the bill does attempt to address the problem of insurance companies denying benefits on the basis of pre-existing condition. And Madam Speaker, there is no question that people with illnesses have a harder time getting insurance benefits. The risk of the insurance companies is obviously higher. And as a result, people with pre-existing conditions are either being denied coverage, they're being required to pay premiums that are prohibitive, Madam Speaker, and without insurance coverage, without the financial means, people are being forced to forego important and necessary medications as well, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, without medication, these people end up in emergency rooms, which disrupts their lives and costs our healthcare system more in the end. And we all know the situation in emergency rooms these days, Madam Speaker, as we've outlined in the Liberal caucus. There's over 500 or over 13,000 hours that emergency rooms have been closed in this province over the past several years. But Madam Speaker, let me get back to the bill, Bill 212. This bill attempts to address the type of situation I'm talking about. There are some questions. The question is, perhaps does the bill address the issue? Is the issue that I was talking about? Is this the best way to do it? We kind of need a clear idea of what the effects of this type of legislation will be, Madam Speaker. We also want to know, will it lead to higher costs for insurance? Perhaps will it lead to less types of insurance being covered? Madam Speaker, you can't really force an insurance company to lose money. And we also have, Madam Speaker, the question of whether or not the issues can be corrected by government covering more type of medication than they currently do, perhaps. But, Madam Speaker, there's no question that these are important issues. This legislation attempts to address them. We believe the legislation has merit, Madam Speaker, and would be quite glad to support it. So, having said that, Madam Speaker, I thank you for your time, and I will take my seat.
The honourable member from Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker. I understand the NDP health critic will be speaking last on this particular motion. The points with regards to the benefits of this particular piece of legislation, I believe, have been fairly well made. But I think to accent the reality of what it means to not only those that are affected directly by the plan, but also for the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. I believe in many instances, insurance companies, whether by design or just by the way the process operates, allow individuals who become excluded from a plan by the death of a spouse or a loved one who is the main carrier of the plan, and then all of a sudden the remaining members of the family or those that are generally provided the coverage appear to be excluded. So there is a cost. I believe, and I think the minister has made the point extremely well, that there should be a cost analysis done on this, because if what the member has stated is correct, and I have no doubts, her research is fairly thorough, particularly referring to the experience down in the United States, where legislation requires that type of carryover for those that are affected by any particular insurance or medical plan, Mr. Speaker, particularly in Nova Scotia, because as we know, statistics show that, for example, just with regards to the number of seniors, the number of individuals that retire and become seniors, that population factor in Nova Scotia is expected to double by the year 2026. So we're going from approximately 125,000 seniors to over 200,000 senior citizens in this province. And obviously, many of these individuals, if they die and their spouses, or if for whatever reason, through separation or for many of the relationships in the province today are common law. And in the absence of some proper verbiage in some of these agreements, because there has been recent legislation there, this will have a major negative impact on not only those individuals, those spouses, but also their children, Madam Speaker. So I believe that the points that were raised in this particular piece of legislation are very worthy of further consideration. I believe all indications are we'll probably have a fall session of the legislature, and I think the minister has extended the invitation that the honourable member bring to the department, the senior officials in the department, and I know that the minister responsible for insurance in the province, the Minister of Transportation and Public Works, he would be particularly interested in this particular piece of legislation. It's one of the few times I've seen him smile all day, but when he thought he would save some more money for the government. And I think he's been going with his pen ever since the bill came up for discussion here today. So that's very positive, and I noticed that this is a matter of considerable interest to the Minister of Health because, as we all know, concern has been raised in all three caucuses, in all members of the House, about the ever-escalating cost, healthcare cost in the province of Nova Scotia. And you know, some drugs I've heard in recent weeks, the fact that the cost of prescription drugs is continuing to escalate unnecessarily. Now, I don't have the expertise, or I don't have the actual data that or the details that would give substantive support or denial to that, Madam Speaker. But I'm sure that all this anecdotal evidence that seems to be coming across seems to warrant that this bill does require further examination and to hold some of these large companies accountable for their actions, because they seem to be downloading not only on local governments, but also for the individuals that really can't afford it. And we saw that what happened, there was a report on CBC just recently that upwards of 40% of all those Americans that required medical coverage or medical attention and didn't have some form of medical insurance ended up going either to the point of bankruptcy or expiring all their assets that they've saved all their lifetime. And this is not certainly what we would want for our citizens here in Nova Scotia. So, Madam Speaker, I think it's a very worthy piece of legislation. I believe that whether it proceeds for further examination before this House in this session, or indeed in the fall session, I think the opportunity is there to do something good. This is good social legislation. It's good, it's fair, and it helps to protect the basic needs of those that need health care in Nova Scotia, because we're not all fortunate enough to be working for the government where we have, good health insurance plans, good medical plans. We're not fortunate enough to work for the federal government. We're not all that fortunate, or even municipal governments or large corporations. There are tens of thousands of Nova Scotians that are classified as the working poor, and they need some form of protection. And I don't think that we would be remiss in any form. We would not be negligent in any form by holding these large insurance companies accountable, because the point, I believe, has been made in the opening remarks by the honourable member about the actuarials. And it's amazing, for example, when you get into an insurance, get into a car accident, for example, insurance companies, they will set aside X number of dollars for what they contemplate to be the long-term cost of that particular claim. And they always seem to look at the outside limit. They may negotiate probably 25 or 50% of what they actually set aside through the actuarial claim or the long-term liability for their company. So in fact, there's a windfall for them at the end of the day. And I've never known too many claims to be over the amount that they actually set aside. So the point has been very well made about the matter of actuarials, and that's where I believe the minister responsible for insurance can work with the Minister of Environment and Labour and the Superintendent of Insurance and provide some additional detail, not only for all members of the House, but certainly for the sponsor of the bill, so that we can have better detail when it comes before the House, perhaps later in the session or in the fall. I know that a bill of this nature would certainly go before law amendments, and all Nova Scotians and even the insurance companies, all stakeholders will have an opportunity, Madam Speaker, to come and speak either in favor or in opposition to this particular bill. But personally, I think it's a good piece of legislation, and it will not only save the taxpayers of Nova Scotia a considerable amount of money, but it will put in perspective the issue of responsibility and due diligence, and where responsibility should be, because far too often the consumers, and those particularly with low and fixed incomes that can't afford these luxury plans, but are somehow forced into that situation by no fault of their own. Madam Speaker, I think it will certainly serve each and every one of us very well. And the point about the health care cost, I mean, our health care budget alone this year is over $2 billion. $2 billion. And still, all indications are, as by recent reports, that if we continue at this rate, is it 2009? I think we'll be well beyond. I realize my time has expired. I think it's good legislation, and I think it is worthy of support. Thank you.
The honourable member from Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to rise in my place and speak as well in support of the ideas that are brought here before the members of this legislature in Bill 212 by my colleague, the member for Halifax Atlantic. This is something probably that you don't really think about until you run into it in a concrete way. And I would say 2 years ago, I had a phone call from somebody I had known quite some time ago who was associated now with Acadia University as a student advisor. And she was calling because she had a young woman who was a student at the university who had juvenile diabetes and required particular medications, insulin, and all of the other kinds of pharmaceutical supports that people with diabetes require in order to manage their disease. And the person who was calling me was very concerned for this young woman because she had drug coverage under her father's insurance plan. However, she was about to graduate from the university, and she would no longer be either living at home, and her age was such that she would no longer be considered a dependent under his insurance plan. And she had, in preparation for the time when she would no longer be covered by her dad's plan, had started looking around for an insurance plan that would provide her with the kind of drug coverage and other kinds of coverage that she enjoyed in his plan. And she found that she simply could not, first of all, find an insurer that would pick her up. They all considered her diabetic condition a pre-existing condition, and she was exempted from many plans. And then she eventually found one or two carriers who were prepared to look at her, but the premiums to get into the plan were probably as much as what it would cost her to go out and buy the medications and the things that she needed directly, and then some. So it was a very stressful situation for this young woman. That was the first time I encountered this situation, Madam Speaker. I, since that time, have had actually probably 3 or 4 fairly similar situations where it's students who are on their parents' drug plans who reach the age of majority where they're no longer dependents. They're no longer, let's say, students. They're about to graduate, and they go out into into the world on their own. And all of a sudden, and particularly if you have a young person who has some kind of chronic condition, such as diabetes, but there can be a whole variety of situations. You may have a young person who has had a kidney transplant and has to be has to take the anti-rejection medications and those kinds of medications on a daily basis, which can be extraordinarily expensive and covered by the plan of a parent. Well, what happens to that child when they become 19 and no longer qualify for coverage as dependents? To go out and try to acquire health insurance is an incredible challenge. And so this is, I think, the motivation behind the legislation that the member from Halifax Atlantic has brought forward. And I think it's such a great idea, and it draws on the American public policy arena. I was very pleased to hear the minister speaking earlier about the openness of the government to explore further the effectiveness of this legislation. And as well, I was very heartened to hear the member from Glace Bay indicate the support of his party in exploring this legislation further. And so often, Mr. Speaker, in this chamber, when ideas are brought forward, and as well, the independent member express his support for this idea. Often we have a hard time finding some common ground here in this chamber, but it seems that in this case there is a fair degree of common ground, and that's very encouraging. The honourable member from Cape Breton West was indicating about the high cost of drugs. And just this week, we heard the breakthrough that the researchers believe they have affected with respect to medication for breast cancer. And I, like many other people, listened to this with great interest because breast cancer, as we all know, is a very big concern for people around this province. And the thing that concerned me in that report is that even when Herceptin becomes available here, once it goes through the next round of hurdles that it has to go through to become available for women with breast cancer, the cost is going to be $40,000 a year. And so, Mr. Speaker, those kinds of costs for people who don't have private health insurance to cover their drugs will leave certainly many people in a very serious situation, knowing that there is a drug that could be very successful in terms of treating their cancer, but how do they get access to it? So, Mr. Speaker, this, I think, is the purpose of this legislation. And I know that the honourable member has done a great deal of research already looking at how these provisions have worked in other jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, I think Nova Scotians sometimes might be surprised to learn that here in Nova Scotia we have the highest percentage of private health care consumption of any province in the country. And when you actually start looking at why that is, what you will find is that an awful lot of Nova Scotians purchase private health insurance and private health services, like home care services, for example, when they don't qualify for the provisions that we have in our public system. Home care isn't a universally accessible health care program yet, although perhaps one day it will be. And so many people rely for their drug coverage on private health insurance, to get physiotherapy on their private drug plans, to get a whole variety of healthcare services. They rely very heavily on private plans, because in our public system, the only things that are covered are, as we know, visitation to a physician's office, so physician services for insured services, and the procedures that you get in a hospital for if you have diagnostic services or any surgical procedures that are procedures that haven't been delisted. But outside of that, Mr. Speaker, everything else that people require in terms of maintaining their health and treating various healthcare conditions, particularly drugs and particularly perhaps equipment, comes through private health insurance. If you follow the financial pages, Mr. Speaker, we will see that the health insurance industry is probably one of the most profitable places for an individual to invest, Mr. Speaker. It's an area that sees continual growth in terms of the value of stocks and bonds in the health insurance industry. And so I think that, this is something we as a province really need to explore. We need to look at the practices of private health insurance in the province. We need to look at ways that we can minimize the burden of consumers and citizens, particularly people who have chronic health requirements and chronic health needs. And as the member from Cape Breton West indicated, this in fact may contribute to a lessening of some of the financial burden that occurs in our private system, which is taxpayer-based. In the cases that I talked about earlier of students who become of the age of majority, no longer are dependent, no longer are in university, and are independent and no longer covered, they end up in the private system, or the public system, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Time allotted for the opposite member. This bill has been expired. Thank you. My member to the left there, assistant. Thank you. The Honourable Government House Leader on tomorrow's...
Consent of the House to revert back to the order of business, reports of committees.
Agreed. Reports of committees. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Chairman of the Law Amendments Committee, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 162, an act to amend Chapter 380 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act. Bill number 179, an act respecting support services for the disabled persons in self-managed care. The committee recommends these bills for favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
Or these bills before the committee...
Mr. Speaker, as Chairman of the...
Or these bills before the Committee on the House on Bills.
Chairman, on behalf of the committee of the Chairman of the Committee on Law Amendments, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bill. Bill number 197, an act to amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 1996, the Fisheries and Coastal Resources Act. The committee recommends this bill to the favorable consideration of the House without amendment.
Or this bill be referred to the whole House on Bills. The Honourable Government House Leader on tomorrow's hours and order of business.
Speaker, I move the House to now rise to meet again on the morrow at the hour of 12 noon, and the House will sit until 8 p.m. The order of business following the daily routine and question period, Mr. Speaker, will be a smorgasbord of everything that's on the order paper. We'll be doing public bills for second reading and third reading. We'll be doing committee of the whole House on bills, and there may be some private and local bills there too. I'll have to check that through, Mr. Speaker, but if there are, we'll be dealing with those as well. So that, Mr. Speaker, I move the House to now rise.
Motion is the House adjourned to 12 noon tomorrow. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The House is adjourned to 12 noon tomorrow. We've reached the moment of interruption. The honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure to stand in the House tonight and talk about something that's near and dear to me. I did a resolution, as you know, earlier this afternoon in the legislature that be it resolved that MLAs in this legislature recognize the athletic ability of Guysborough Sheet Harbour individuals who have been named to the 2005 Canada Summer Games team, and also recognize the dedication taken by the 449 Nova Scotians in preparing for the games in August in Regina. And Mr. Speaker, as you know, and all members of the House know, that the constituency of Guysborough Sheet Harbour is huge when it comes to travel distance, but not very big in population. When the Electoral Boundaries Commission was doing their review a few years ago, I remember a statement made by one of the members when he said, Guysborough Sheet Harbour is nearly as big as Prince Edward Island, where they have 27 MLAs, and yet only one is going to serve the area of Guysborough Sheet Harbour. But despite the size of Guysborough Sheet Harbour, Mr. Speaker, which can take you nearly a day to travel if you go into every nook and cranny, the population is only around 11,000. Despite the size and the small population, when it comes to competitive spirit and agility in sports, Guysborough Sheet Harbour